Welcome to the Seeker's Table, an international community committed to cultivating a deeper understanding of intimacy, companionship, and trust with the divine through contemplative gatherings both in person and online. My name is Reverend Ian Whitemar, and each week I interview a spiritual companion or director from across religious traditions to hear how they are guiding people seeking insight through contemplative practice. Today is a special episode, the sixth of 7 interviews guiding our journey through Lent this year. My guest is Cara Lee Griffith. She began reading Brother Lawrence following the birth of her third child and began to rediscover an intimacy with God through the stillness and the silence. Cara began reading other contemplatives, Teresa of Avila, Martin Laird, St. Ignatius, which led her to seek other contemplatives out in her local area. She joined Journeymates, a program inviting Christians to open time and space to simply be with God, and then discovered that she was on the path for ordination. She'll be ordained this May and is planting a church in Raleigh in the fall of 2002 with her husband. Cara, thank you so much for coming out to the Seeker's Table.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ian.
Now, you were raised in the church. Your father was a pastor.
Mm.
And sort of in our pre-dialogue, you were talking about how you, as a child, you prayed a lot and you had this connection. But then something changed and
Mm.
that relationship with the divine just wasn't what it was. And I'm wondering if
Yeah.
you can share a little bit about that part of the journey.
Yeah. So I am the oldest of three daughters, and my dad is a pastor or a recently retired pastor. And we were a part of the Southern Baptist tradition. And um, some of my youngest memories were we just spent a tremendous amount of time outside. We lived in rural Mississippi, and um, God was woven into our family life. It was just what we talked about and part of the rhythms of our life. And so I just have distinct memories of laying outside with my sisters and watching the clouds. And there's this huge field of daffodils beside our house, and who God was very connected to those things for
Mm.
me. They just seemed um, inseparable. That's who I understood God to be. And but as I began to grow up into middle school and then high school and then even into college, there's a real shift in that. And I guess it became theological correctness or rightness. And there the way it seemed like I was taught to read the Bible was a real mastery of the text. I needed to get it right. What was the correct meaning here? And then I just even remember being taught to pray in high school that there are ways in which we approach God, and don't be selfish when you talk to God, and make sure you're in line with his will. And I think I almost became paralyzed. Prayer became a fearful thing for me. I didn't want to get it wrong. I really loved God. And so I wanted to um, not be offensive, maybe, in how I prayed. And so I wouldn't say that it quenched my prayer life, but there was definitely that loss of wonder,
Mm.
and simplicity, and maybe just safety and love that I felt as a child, um, was diminished, I think, in the name of getting it right, and and that theological correctness that I was kind of being taught. So yeah, so there are definitely some shifts there from my childhood and into my adolescent and early adulthood.
And then you got married,
Yeah,
had some kids, and
yeah,
with the birth of your third child, it was not an easy birth.
no.
And um, somebody introduced you to Brother Lawrence, or you found
Yeah,
Brother Lawrence, or
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so, my husband was a pastor, and I had gone to seminary. I mean, there's just always been a fire within me
Mm,
for the love of God and
mhm,
wanting other people, to have that and experience that, but probably maybe it was once I started having kids in general, there was such an identity shift for me, in that transition to motherhood, um, that there was a real yearning that was indescribable to me. Like, I just knew, um, there is something more that I want, um, in how I experience God and just I don't know, it was indescribable, but those seeds were there of I want something different than what I'm experiencing right now, and um, so I feel like that was kind of tilling the soil, for this next season of my life. So I had, my 3rd child. I had a very complicated pregnancy, and I was on full bed rest for 14 weeks,
mm,
and I could only lay on one side, and
mm,
so I just stared out a window, all day, and, in that space, just so many things began colliding for me. One, I started having this strange realization of I don't know how to pray at all because, I'm not in the like, I don't know what's going on with anybody. I would pray about things, I guess, is what I would say. And so there, I didn't have things to pray about anymore. And so I began to really be confronted with, um, what is it to just be present with God? And that's I started reading Brother Lawrence then, and what is it to practice the presence? And that was a real wrestle for me. Like that didn't come, it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a wrestle. And I think when you have such extended time of silence and solitude, there's a real confrontation,
mm,
that can happen in that place that actually can be really beautiful, and, so my bed rest was from February to May, and so I looked out my window and I saw winter pass, and I saw, daffodils bloom and the Japanese maples and dogwoods and all these bluebirds, and there was, I think, a drawback to that childhood wonder of seeing the beauty of nature unfold, and there was nothing I could do but sit and enjoy it,
mm,
and then, I think some of the things that began rising to the surface for me were, I started having these really big fears of what if when I'm done, kind of ministries pass me by or I don't have a place in the world anymore because I've just been in this room for so long. And I mean, it was so clear. I felt like I heard the voice of God say, if you never get out of this bed again, you are enough for me.
mm,
And that actually was not words of comfort at the time. Like it was also a real wrestle of like, no, like how can that be? What I do is really important, and, but the again, kind of the blessing of I had days to sit with that, and what does it mean that my very existence is enough for God?
mm,
Nothing I do or perform or it's just me is I just felt his love for weak and in the bed Kara, and so all of that was just, like, happening within me, I'm wrestling with it, but I'm, like, so excited to have this baby, so, like, that's still just, like, the end goal, and, then it's like my life will resume back to normal, and then had a very traumatic delivery, almost died in childbirth, and the I don't know how to describe it except immediately I felt as if, like, a black veil was just placed over me,
oh, wow.
um, I felt totally cut off from God in a way that was just unimaginable. Like, I didn't know how near he had been to me until
It was
that
gone.
felt severed. My husband noticed pretty quickly I was experiencing PTSD and just a lot of fear. And so, pretty quickly got into some trauma therapy and found this therapist because she's known in Raleigh for being a really great trauma therapist. But I didn't know she also was a part of this contemplative
Oh.
group. Um, and as I began to express distress about my faith, that I just felt completely cut off from God, she began to invite me into more spaces of silence, and a real invitation of just let God be God. Like, it's okay that you feel this isolation right now. Like, can you just be okay with those things? And my husband, we began the rhythm of he would take the kids on Saturday, and I would just have the day, and I would just ground, and I would lay on our carpet. Um, and it was like the only thing I could get out of my mouth as a prayer was help me.
Mm,
Um, and in that space, God was there and he was present. And I feel like there was nothing I could offer in that space. I was so dark and in such despair that his presence of love is what came in and began to work and began to heal me. And it wasn't anything that I was doing, but it was his presence alongside me, beginning to work that. And um, my therapist kept encouraging me. She was like, "Kira, stop trying to control the situation." Because I'm like, "Just tell me what to do. Tell me what exercises to do. Like, I want to be back to normal." And she was like, "This is not how this works."
mm,
And like, really invited me into a slow journey,
mm,
a journey of compassion and gentleness for myself. Um, whatever healing I needed at that moment, giving myself permission for that. And I think the way my contemplative life was born really out of that. And now that's just the life I want to live, like one of gentleness and one of compassion and one of allowing myself and others to be where they need to be in their journey and inviting God's love into that space. So that kind of through my own birthed a new spiritual journey for me.
and uh, it seems only natural, right, that we would want to kind of fix, when we're in something, that we'd want to fix it.
Yes.
And I guess sort of what I'm hearing you say is that the contemplative path, and even this therapist was like, well, maybe there's another way to do it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and I think the deep work of healing,
Mm,
is a slow process,
mm,
because there's a lot there, and, to truly allow ourselves to bring to the surface all that is within us,
mm,
bring that before God, just takes time, and I think for good or for bad, we're kind of wired for wanting to get back on the road and do it, live our lives, and so just kind of a retraining that it's good to have permission to take time and to go deeper, into all that needs to be healed. Even permission to open our eyes and say, maybe there's other things going on too that like I'm blind to, and I need to sit with that for a little bit longer.
mm.
So
So you joined this, the group is called Journey Mates.
yeah.
And so is this an international group, national, or?
So they started in Raleigh,
Hmm.
North Carolina, and
Hmm.
now they are starting cohorts in other states. So now
Okay.
so now it's becoming national, and um it is a group of people who get together, and we meet all over Raleigh in little companioning groups.
Hmm.
And so it's set aside once a month for we do some guided silence and we do Lectio Divina, and then
Mm,
we have a set aside time of just silence. And then we come back for a companioning portion at the end of that silence. And, you know, all of it I deeply love, but I think the companioning part has been the most surprising to me, the depth of that space.
hmm.
So we're kind of there's maybe 30 or 40 people in the large group for the silence and the lectio, and then our companioning are smaller groups, like maybe 6 of us, and we know we wear name tags, but outside of that, you don't know anything about these people, but we have just shared something so incredibly intimate
Hmm.
as we have made space to sit before God, and so, that companioning space is kind of rhythm of sharing in silence.
Hmm.
There's no fixing, there's no correcting.
Right.
Um, there's just paying attention, and if you have a word that you would like to offer, you can, and, um, this is now my 3rd or 4th year with them, and I think every single time we meet, I walk away so full and so floored by the depth of intimacy that can come within a group of people who don't know anything about each other, but we have shared sacred space together. And so, Journey Mates has been very formative. The time is very special, but I would also say, especially in the companioning part, you're exercising muscles that you, or at least I didn't know I needed, which
Hmm.
is restraint of my mouth. And that I don't always have to say things to people. And so a practicing of a listening to them, a listening to myself, a listening to the spirit, um, that I think has even transformed how I want to listen to other people outside of that group. Um, so yeah, just in general, can I be present with people in a different way? Um,
A couple of years ago, I really moved my life towards a sort of group spiritual direction model.
mm,
And part of this was coming after, I started sitting Zen meditation in 1998. And a lot of that sort of very individual, one on one contemplative time, which I think is still really valuable. And I
yeah.
think I invite people to do it. But something really changes, I think, when you enter into contemplative time with others.
Mm,
There's a Episcopal priest named Carter Hayward who's in North Carolina, and she talks about God as mutuality.
mm,
And for me, when I am sitting with others and experiencing God, uh, sort of moving through us as a group and speaking through us as a group for one person and being
mm.
fed, it just is such a different awareness and opening and experience. I enjoy it so much. It feels so intimate.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes I think when I'm just doing my one-on-one practice, it almost reinforces my isolation. It doesn't have to, but it can lead that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
well, and I think, there's such movements that take place in contemplative practices, and part of what we have to do is just pay attention to even what's going on, and for me, I am a person who can easily get stuck within myself,
Hmm.
and so that inward doesn't move outward if I'm not careful,
Hmm.
and sometimes I need those long spaces to myself, but I found that that companioning process helps unstick things that otherwise I'm not even totally aware are there until I start sharing, and then, oh my goodness, like, I didn't even know that was there, and then to be met with compassion and love for whatever it is I just said also just reinforces the reminder of that's how God is meeting me. Like, those people are God back to me in that
Hmm.
moment, and, opens up space, for me to continue that life back into my everyday world. So, yeah, I love the companioning aspect to it.
Now you're going to be ordained in a couple of
Yeah,
months yourself,
yeah,
um, and planting a church in the
yeah,
fall. But right now you're teaching English, and I think you must be at a religious school, a
yeah.
Episcopal school or something, or
It's a non-denominational private
non-denominational,
Christian school.
non
Yeah,
private. And so you have a group of eighth grade boys
yeah,
who you're you do contemplative time with,
yeah,
which,
yeah,
having been an eighth grade boy, uh, that is probably not where I was at. And so I'm
yeah.
wondering what it's like to work with these, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
13-year-olds, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So, I normally teach high school
Mhm.
English,
Mhm.
and I kind of want them to be as old as possible, like, give me 12th grade.
Right.
And I came back into the classroom last year after my husband resigned and it's COVID and there was a position open and I was like, "All right." And they always said, "So the position is middle school English and you get the 8th grade boys." And I was like, how am I gonna do this?" And so this is after, I've been practicing, I've been contemplative practices at this point, and they're what you expect 8th grade boys to be,
Mhm.
they're very energetic and very little self-control, and they just like say all kinds of things. And but I think two just incredibly beautiful things. I think the English class, like, stories invite us
Mm.
to practice our humanity. And
Mm.
so, I wanted to think about what kind of stories do I want to invite these boys into, to use their imagination and to begin to place themselves in different aspects. And then it started out as a necessity. They were so insane coming into my classroom that I was like, I just have to figure out something that calms them down. And I was like, why not do silence?
Mm.
So um, and now it's kind of a rhythm that we do. So, I ask them to come in and the bell rings and I say, "All right, gentlemen, it's time to take a breath and close your eyes and put your head down. The next 3 minutes are yours. They're a gift for you. So you can just rest, or I invite you to think about where has God shown love to you today." And then we just sit in silence for 3 minutes, and then I close with whatever the lectionary reading is for that day. And then we start class from there. And some days, they're like flopping out of their seat or, making the chair squeak. But more than likely, as soon as the bell rings, I don't even have to prompt them anymore, and they put their heads down. And um, something really intimate has been born in that space. And they began to so every now and then, I don't really ask them about it, but every now and then I'll say, would someone like to share maybe something they're thankful for or a way in which you felt God love you today? And as the year has progressed, it just they become more honest and more vulnerable about what they sensed during that time. And I've had some of them say, this is the time of the day that I feel most loved. This is my
Mm.
favorite time of the day. Last year when I did it, it was the week of the election,
Mm.
and, I gave us, like, a really long silence the day of the election because they were all very agitated, and
Mm.
it's what they were talking about. And, when I was done, one of the boys said, "Miss Griffith, that seems like that was really long." And I was like, I just think we needed an extra measure of silence today." And he said, "I wish our whole nation could put their head down and rest right now." Um,
Mm.
and so I think just offering them, you have permission to have this space. You have permission to be loved. You have permission to rest. And so during Lent, we had our chapel service on Lent, and I have invited them, if they would like, to spend the first part of their few minutes thinking of God's love. And then would they ask and see, is there something in which they would like to offer God for forgiveness out of being deeply loved? And so, um, it's just, I think, inviting them to participate in that space and giving them permission to participate in that space has been really beautiful, and I've loved it more than I was expecting to. So, yeah.
Born out of necessity and then like a
That's right.
beautiful
That's right.
treasure. Yeah.
That's right.
Mhm.
And I just think too, like, these 8th grade boys are at such a crossroad in their life, and the world is telling them all these things that they're supposed to be.
Right.
They're supposed to be smart and strong and leaders and all this stuff, and it's no, like, you are to be loved and you're to be exactly who God created you to be. And
Mhm.
my prayer over them is that a little seed is planted, that when the world and their family or their internal selves start telling them to be something else, they can go back to how can I ground and how can I can be present with
Mm.
myself and with God. So
Now you went into ordination, you did
yeah,
seminary,
yeah,
um, and it's not the Southern Baptist tradition.
yeah,
You shifted,
I
uh,
did.
and you're planting a church. So how is this contemplative part of your life going to be reflected in your ministry and in this church that you're planting? Because I'm, I'm a minister, and it is interesting how little contemplative space we find in
Mhm,
churches,
mhm.
perhaps Catholic churches,
Yeah,
um, but even Episcopals, Lutherans, like there's a real you sort of referenced this earlier, like a discomfort I think people feel
mhm,
with the silence.
mhm, mhm.
It's so much easier to be doing,
Yeah,
or it feels that way.
yeah,
And I just wondering how all of this is going to influence your ministry. And
yeah. So one thing that's just so beautiful and it really just feels like a gift God gave. My husband has had his own journey
mm,
that has also led him um, to a contemplative journey, and it really kind of happened simultaneously for us. And again, feels more like a gift that God would draw our even our hearts together in that way. And so there were lots of shifts that began to take place in our life. It all kind of um, came together, and he was a pastor at one church and resigned, and kind of this dream we began to have to pastor together out of a contemplative space was born for us. And um, so as we've dreamed and as we've thought, I really feel passionate that I don't want to have like, here's the prayer ministry at our church, or here's like the
uh-huh.
contemplative space at our church, but how is this woven into how he and I lead, how we sit with people, how we're present with people, how um, when people meet together in groups, we like silence is just a part of how we interact with one another. And so our our hope in our prayer is that we just create a space where people feel safe and feel loved, and they have permission for that kind of healing, that kind of silence. And um, it feels like you can't program that into a church. It just
Mm,
has to come through how we lead and how what we offer people. And so, I mean, we're just hoping that it is as we can kind of maybe set a tone for this new church, that it's just woven into who we are, and trusting that that may feel uncomfortable for people, and
mhm,
that's okay. We know that different churches do different things, and this we can invite people into this space with us,
mm.
and trust that the people who have that yearning, have that longing, will stay and hopefully grow and flourish, and that those rhythms will go outward in their life. And I actually believe so we have a Catholic center about 2 hours from Raleigh that's a contemplative center,
Mhm,
that focuses on justice,
mhm,
and that their heart is that out of this contemplative space, we begin to long for justice to happen in our
mhm,
world. And so that is to me the true beauty of when we are transformed and we are healed, we long for that healing in the rest of the world. And so I think those two things feel inseparable to us as well. And so that when we invite people into that contemplative place, we actually hope there is like an incredible transformation that begins to take place in our city as well. So yeah, that's our hope. And
yeah, I feel. personally speaking, that the the movement for justice and caring and compassion, uh, for me anyway, the grounding in silence helps me see how interwoven I am with the rest of
Mhm,
life
mhm, mhm.
rather than isolated or
That's right.
alienated, which is the message that I receive so often. Like like there's not enough, there's scarcity, there's fear. Like
That's right.
how do I need to get my own? How do I do all of these things which lead me away from the message of justice and caring and compassion? And then the silence lets me into an intimacy that all of a sudden, you know, the justice message just becomes part of the life.
That's right. That's right. That's
Mm-hmm.
right. And I think when we in that silence, when we can realize God's gaze on us, when we see how deeply loved we are,
Mm-hmm.
when we start looking at other people, we ought to be looking with that same gaze of love,
Right.
and that fuels, like, a desire for that kind of justice in the world, because those people are God
Right.
and God's people, and so, it's that movement of seeing God, being able to reflect inward and then and taking that what we've received back out. So,
Right.
yeah.
Now we're entering into when this interview goes out, we'll be entering into the fifth week of Lent. And the reading that we'll be using is Isaiah 43. And I'm wondering if there's anything in this reading that speaks to you in particular, um, just in terms of
Yeah.
people on this journey and sort of I think of Lent as a place where I can just release so that I can. I think of it as me sort of carrying like a ton of baggage,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
the
yeah,
place where I just let stuff go so that
yeah,
I can move towards what I'm being asked to do in my life. Um,
yeah.
and so,
Yeah, I think well, one, Isaiah is one of my favorite books in the Bible. The
yeah.
imagery is just unreal, and, um, one of the things I love about the church calendar is it invites us into those imaginative spaces
Mm-hmm.
that I so much love with my stories,
Mm-hmm.
and so Lent invites us into the wilderness, with
Right.
Jesus, with the Israelites, and I think it gives us set aside space to practice, like what you just said, setting those things aside, examining ourselves in light of the love of God to be able to release what needs to be released. And um, one thing I've just really sat with and have felt a lot of times we associate the wilderness with like despair or emptiness. But for the Israelites, there was manna there, and there was
Mm-hmm.
quail, and the presence of God was there, and, the wilderness, it's not the promised land, it's not
Right.
really where we wanna stay, but it's actually full of life if we will pay attention to it,
Mm-hmm.
and I think this season of Lent, I don't know, I think previously in my life, I had some fear of Lent, like, I'm supposed to, like, think about
Right.
all the ways in which I'm really, really sinful, and then, like, I'm gonna be really glad God's not super mad at me, right? And, but instead, using this as a space of because I can see myself as God sees me, I can see myself as so loved, I don't have to be ashamed of things, I can release them, and I can see all the life that is around me, and so this passage in Isaiah is, you know, they have been in the wilderness, and then all of a sudden, there's rivers and there's streams and there's wild animals, and the people are being formed so that they can praise who God is. And it is not a place to be feared because it's a place where God, if we will let Him, like work within us and bring life, bring water, heal us. And so I just think this passage is so beautiful for the life that is sprung out of those dry places. And I think the contemplative life invites us to examine that. What is dry in my life? What is
Hmm.
hard and broken? And where can refreshing, wonderful water like pour over me and spring to life there? Um, so yeah, I think this is just an incredibly rich, beautiful passage for all that God offers to us in this season.
Yeah, the line, I will make a way in the wilderness and
That's
rivers
right.
in the desert. And then, talking about the jackals and the ostriches. And it's just,
Yeah,
it's so, it's actually quite exciting sounding.
it is. Yeah,
Um, that not just, I suppose there's that message of when you were on bed rest and God was like, that's enough. And you're like, I'm really hoping for something more than that.
yeah, yeah,
There's that dimension of like, I'll care for you even here. But
yeah,
also for those who are curious about the contemplative path, that there is such richness if you're willing to walk out into what can feel like scary space
yeah.
just because, most of our culture does not prioritize it or,
That's right.
um, tell you how valuable it can be. And you may
That's
not
right.
know a lot of people who are doing that.
That's right. That's right.
Um,
Well, and I think sometimes the way up is down, and
mm,
that's really scary that, to enter into the wilderness and to do a real examination of ourselves can be really scary,
right,
and can actually feel like, "Man, I'm feeling worse here,"
right.
and I think holding space for people to say, "That's okay."
Hmm.
Um, that's okay because, that is the journey of healing, it can be long, but there can be a real knitting together of things that need to be knit together, um, I think again, permission to allow people to have that space that they need, to offer those things up and examine those spaces and be good listeners in those spaces.
And when I was reflecting on this passage, there's that um, Parker Palmer book that invites you to sort of, if you want to see your wild animal, you have to walk into the woods and sit down
That's right.
and
That's
be
right.
quiet. And I've always loved that passage, but I'd never imagined like the wild animal could be an ostrich, which is like,
That's right. That's right.
that
That's
would be
right.
amazing to see. I'd love to see a
That's right.
wild ostrich.
That's right.
And it can just be so fantastic. Like, why don't we just walk out and sit down and see what comes?
See what's there. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I love that passage. We have a big creek in our backyard, and,
Hmm.
so we get deer
Hmm.
and all kinds of animals, and, my husband and I actually refer to that
Oh,
Parker
right.
Palmer passage, as, we want to see the deer,
Hmm.
in that exercise
Right.
becomes like an internal exercise, for us of we also wanna hear ourselves too, and so
Right. Kara, this has been so great. Thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your story.
thank you for having me, Ian.